But I actually believe that the experience of the spirit world is an intrinsic link to an older consciousness that is needed in order to heal our future. So, big idea in a short summary. The way I see the unfolding of life is that the first phase or stage was mystery itself. Whatever preceded everything that is, whatever gave birth to that big bang or the first moment, even if you believe, I don't know, that the earth was magically created by a divine being, there's still the moment before all that. So that's the first phase. To me, that's the origin era. And that mystery is still with us. It's important. If we think that we know everything, we're in trouble. And then came the age of nature. That was before human technology and design. I call it the age of nature because there was nothing happening but nature. Stars, planets forming, dinosaurs, and the whole deal. It's just life unfolding. No one writing books about it, no one analyzing it, no one ascribing meaning to it. But then human culture arises. Human culture develops, and we have cave paintings, and we have artifacts, and what we know from the oldest stories of humans to human culture just 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, is that we lived once in an animated world. In fact, if you remember anthropology in college or even some basic high school courses would talk about animism. And this kind of idea that once upon a time, our foolish ancestors who were superstitious and uneducated, they believed everything had a soul. They believed everything could be talked to. Now we find that that's frankly true. And science is bearing that up. Trees talk to each other. Animals talk to each other. We even discovered that animals and trees talk to each other. It's extraordinary.
Welcome to Caritas Consciousness Project. My name is Gloria Guidu, and Caritas is dedicated to promoting the evolution of consciousness as key to individual growth and global healing. And we draw from a wide variety of both ancient wisdom and leading edge studies in science, consciousness, spirituality, and philosophy. And in addition to our online presentations with guest speakers, we also offer classes and study groups also online. And there are over 100 video recordings on our YouTube channel, which is called Caritas Consciousness Project. And they are also accessible through the video page on our website, which is caritascenter.org. As a nonprofit organization, we rely on the support of our members and donors to keep Caritas going. So if you'd like to support our program, you can make a donation or become a member on our website. And now I'm going to introduce tonight's guest speaker. Let me get Jonathan Ellerby, Ph.D., is a 2 times best-selling author who has spent over 30 years immersed in the world of integrative healing and transformational spiritual growth. With the credibility of advanced academic degrees, extensive personal experience, worldwide travel, and applied experience in diverse settings, Jonathan is also the author of 5 books, including the newest one, 7 Gateways to Spiritual Experience, which I absolutely loved. It was a wonderful experience just reading it. From hospitals to boardrooms, Fortune 500 companies to celebrities and rural communities, government agencies, and premier spa and resort settings, there are few topics in the world of consciousness, culture, religion, spirituality, and leadership that he cannot address with clarity and an inspiring perspective. Jonathan blends his experience collaborating with physicians and psychologists along with his extensive studies with indigenous healers and his decades of work with corporate leaders to help people apply the practical potency of the mind-body connection and the real-life magic of awakening to the power of heart and soul. Okay, and thank you, Jonathan, for being with us this evening, making the time. I really appreciate your being here. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm grateful for the invitation. I'm grateful for everyone who is attending, and certainly grateful for everyone who takes the time to watch anytime in the future. And I'm also quite touched to be a part of your community. I think
Mhm.
you're doing amazing work, and it's really an honor to be here for this. So
Oh,
thank you.
thank you for saying that.
Yeah. Well, are you ready for me to get going?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Now I don't know if this is on speaker view for the people watching or if I need to be pinned.
That's up to the individual. I have it on speaker view, but um, it
Okay.
will be on speaker view on the recording.
Very good. So I, I'm one of the things that's sort of special for me about tonight is that okay, there's a few things. The first is that it's nice to be invited by a community where there's already a lot of understanding about spiritual experience and a lot of interest. So I'd like to talk about these things in a way that is certainly going to be comfortable for anyone who's listening right now that may find some aspects of this new. But I also want to approach this in a way that feels comfortable and familiar and dignified for people who've already been doing a lot of work, right? Um, and so part of what makes us so fabulous is the amount of time we have, right? This is a generous amount of time to really explore these seven states of consciousness that are the heart of the new book, Spiritual Experience. And what I'd like to do is talk to you about what each one is. So if you're not familiar with them all, how would you recognize them? When are they likely to happen? So this is a little bit more academic or even anthropological. So if we are to think of spiritual experiences as human phenomena that occur around the world and throughout time, what are the patterns and what could we expect in our own lives? I'd also like to address the barriers to each one, which I don't normally have time to do. And then for each one, I'd like to also take some time to talk about the lessons. Like, what is it about life or self does each one of these types of experience reveal? And then finally, hopefully, I will have the presence of mind to also address why we need these things for the world, for society, for culture, for relationships, and so on. What is sort of the healing benefit if that's not apparent in what it teaches? So that's sort of my plan for tonight. And then of course we're going to have an interview, a conversation with Gloria, and then we will have questions. So hopefully you will think of questions and write them down all along the way, and then we'll get to them at the end. Having said that, I think I'm going to invite us all just to take a moment, if I could. We're not here for a long guided experience, but even if we could just take a short moment, I'm going to invite everyone listening now and through the recording to stop what you're doing. Even if you're listening and doing the dishes or you're, half doing something else, just take a moment with me, with us, because one of the lessons from spiritual experience is that being present and bringing all of our awareness to whatever we're doing changes our experience of what we're doing. It's not the same, of course, to watch a movie while you're messaging a friend. It's not the same to be out for dinner together while someone's watching a sports game over your shoulder. It's not the same to be out for a walk in nature with headphones on or off or talking or not talking. So I like to consider that all of the experiences of our life are potential spiritual experiences in the sense that they can take us out of the ordinary. In some cosmic sense, I do believe everything is a spiritual experience. But in the sense that we're talking about today, to have an experience that's out of the ordinary or lifts us from the regular mind and the regular heart. Um, that requires that we treat our life and our life experiences as a ceremony. And so as we go into our talk, I'd like to give an example of how that feels or what that looks like. But I'd say that's a pretty important lesson, even if all you get through is the first 10 minutes. When you treat your life like a ceremony, what it means is that you recognize that there is a beginning to each activity, each endeavor that can be dignified, sanctified, that we can bring presence to each endeavor. And this really, I mean, it could be eating dinner, brushing your teeth, going to bed. Um, and when we bring presence and intentional gratitude and reflection to the simple events of our life, they open up to have more meaning. Just to expand briefly, and then we will pause for our breath. One example in my life is that whenever I use water, and this is a very powerful practice if anyone here would like to try it, I always, 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 anytime I turn on a tap anywhere, I always take a moment to feel gratitude consciously, and even to have just a moment's reflection, not 5 minutes, 5 seconds, but I let the awareness of the preciousness of water run through me. Now, of course, there's an ecological benefit because then I don't waste it. And there's sort of a selfish benefit because I think water just tastes better when you're savoring and cherishing and paying attention. But there is something else that happens. There's this kind of communion that occurs, a sense of connection. And if you consider how many times in a day we turn on the water just to wet the sponge, to clean the table, just to brush our teeth, just to splash something on our face, just to get a little bit of some crumbs or butter off our finger, we start to become more conscientious of just how much we are dependent on and interdependent with all the elements of life. So, earth, air, fire, water, all of these things so essential to our vitality, our joy, our wholeness, and our feeling of connection. It's harder to feel alone or isolated when we are constantly reminded of just how connected we are. So, I'm going to invite you to close your eyes with me now, participate in your own way at your own comfort level. But I'm going to encourage you to draw a nice big breath in and then just a nice ordinary sigh of relief. Just breathe out through your mouth. We're going to do that 4 times, once for each of the 4 elements of life. So one first for water, then for air, one for earth, one for fire. And then I invite you to soften your breath, draw in long, slow breaths in through your nose, and then hold it a moment and breathing out long and slowly. And just stay with your breath a little bit. Imagine the vitality of life coming in as you inhale. Hold it a moment as you imagine that vitality mingling with your blood and bones, and then exhaling, drawing in and considering the life force and the life that has participated in this breath. The molecules of helium and nitrogen that have circled this planet that you are breathing now have come and gone from the bodies of plants, from the lungs of elephants, and maybe even have moved through the bloodstream of Jesus or the Buddha. Through the breath, we are connected. And if you like, you might take a moment in this stillness and growing sense of peace, just to feel some gratitude for whatever measure of health that you have, whatever measure of community or friendship, family that you have. For the simple joys of life that you have savored today, whether it was a cup of tea or your morning coffee. And finally, may we feel inspired and grateful and in awe of this life as we sit together across time and space through human ingenuity and nature, hearing each other, seeing each other, reminded we are a part of the human community, the human journey, the evolution of consciousness. And so your presence matters, and we are grateful for each other in this time. And you can release that whatever way is meaningful to you. You could say Amen, all my relations, thank you. You're ready, opening your eyes. So, to start the discussion of spiritual experience, I think I'd like to talk a little bit about how I became interested in this topic. Some people have heard me tell this story, although this is not a story I tell a lot of people, although now I suppose I am about to. Um, I had sort of underestimated the importance of this book to me. Spiritual Experience was a book that I wrote a little while before it was published. It wasn't one of those books that was sort of written and then feverishly the publishing was pursued. It sat a little bit and it came very easily. It's a collection of stories, and there were certainly no shortage of stories. But I think I found myself, I'm going to just share vulnerably just to begin. I think I found myself feeling somewhat cautious. Like maybe a better book is a book with tools and tips and tricks. Maybe a better book is going to make you rich or help you have a better relationship or more health or whatever it is people want. Like really, who knows? And and even though this is I mean, really, this topic is my life. It's my life. I still felt that sort of reticence for a moment. And yet each time I talk about it, it strikes me how the loss of confidence in the importance of spiritual experience, the loss of language around the power of spiritual experience has really come at a massive cost to our world, to our culture. And I want to speak a little bit about that as well. Um, why lost? For me, it wasn't something I was taught about. It wasn't even something that was in my home, even though I had a very open-minded family. I grew up in a very reform and humanistic Jewish household with a fairly agnostic, adamantly agnostic father who was quite, let's say, very much in the rational, reductionistic material realm. Didn't believe in spirits, didn't really want to talk about God, didn't believe in energy or any of that stuff, and frankly thought religion was just a tool that corrupted people. But what brought spirituality to my attention was not family or culture or teachings, but it was spiritual experience itself. I think we're all having spiritual experiences as young people, as children, a sense of the magical, a sense of wonder, a sense of profound inspiration or connection. As young people, being closer to the spirit world as we are, just having arrived, identity is not fully formed. So we don't quite see the difference between ourselves and our family, or ourselves and our dogs, or ourselves even in our home. And of course, that's one of the vulnerable things about being a kid, because dogs run away and homes are moved from and families get divorced. And it's painful for children. But at the same time, that pain points us to something profound, which is that we are born connected. That egolessness and boundarylessness and wonder and interdependence, that is our first condition. And then little by little, so that the soul can inhabit a time on this earth, we acquire an identity, which is necessary more or less to look after the vehicle, right? You have to have a little skin in the game, pardon the pun in a way. Um, you don't, well, in theory, you shouldn't just give your 16-year-old a brand new BMW convertible, because probably they won't treat it well or look after it quite the same way as if they earned money to buy, I don't know, all or some of it. And yet, for me, one thing that perhaps stood out as distinct was that maybe as the spiritual experiences and aha moments of other kids were beginning to fall away, and identity and conditioning and culture and family were beginning to replace those experiences, I found that they persisted. Now, we can talk about why that happens if you want to later. But for now, I'll just say it persisted. And the first thing I believe that I was self-consciously aware of was the feeling and experience of energy. And there was a particular moment, and I honestly can't remember if I wrote about this. I know I wrote about it in a draft of the book. At this moment, I can't remember if it got in. But I remember being about 10 years old, and I spent a lot of time in a wilderness area in northwestern Ontario in Canada. And it was, once upon a time, a very safe place. There was a time where wilderness was safer than a city. And now the city is kind of creeping into the wilderness. But believe it or not, my parents would let me take the little motorboat. It was a 15 horsepower, tiller style motor. I'd go explore the other islands and go for walks and picnics and things like that. And I was about 10 years old, and maybe the summer of my 11th birthday. And I remember I was walking in a cedar forest. I'd come out of the boat onto the shore and pass through the kind of hanging canopy of the cedar trees on the edge of the water. And as I moved into the forest, I was struck notably how different the energy of the forest was from simply not being in the forest. Seems like common sense. I think we are all constantly moving through different fields of energy, and we're feeling it. I don't know that we all stop and think about it. So I moved in, and I noticed a certain quality so palpable it was like I could describe it, right? Like, oh, in here it feels warm. It feels safe. It feels mysterious. It feels full of magic. Is this true of all forests, or is this just my mind? And so I remember walking further through the cedar grove into a poplar stand, or what some people would call aspens. Or they weren't really aspens, but a cousin of the aspen. And I noticed how that felt different. It didn't feel the same. Aspens feel, or poplar feel brighter, more spacious, a lighter kind of energy than cedars. And and so the kind of beginning of exploring, did different rocks feel differently? Did different types of wood feel differently? And it was just my own self experiment, and I certainly didn't tell anyone because it seemed a little bit crazy at the time. But the more I paid attention to it, the more aware of it became. And it would be even subtle things like walking through the trees in the yard of a house was nothing like walking through the trees in the wilderness. It might look the same, but there's something different in a park, from a zoo, from a backyard, from wilderness. And this may seem like a lot of attention to a little thing for you, but I would invite you to consider the same kind of experiment. I think you're already feeling it. If you're old enough to be watching this and listening, you know energy. You know what it's like to get on a plane and sit down and have a kind of funny feeling about the person behind you before you see them. And the next thing you know, you kind of hear that complaining voice that you dreaded. Or sometimes you meet someone, you've barely even introduced yourself and you already like them. There's something you feel. We talk about vibes and these kinds of things. So I think we're all sensing and feeling energy all the time, but we don't all have permission or awareness or experience to reflect on it, to analyze it, to talk about it. So that was really the beginning of it for me. And that would be a subtle version of category, oh, I don't know, I can't remember, 5 in the book, which is divine energy. And that's where this experience started to take me in the next year or so, which was I started to feel more than just that different things have different energy signatures, which I encourage you to play with. But then it began to feel that there was something more behind it. That the more I paid attention to what was different in the energy of every place, I began to notice that there was also something similar, a kind of abiding presence behind it all, beneath it all, which eventually I came to know as God or spirit, consciousness itself. That regardless of what was changing, water, land, traffic, zoo, grocery store, department store, if you remember department stores, um, there was an abiding presence that I could access if I paid attention enough. And it was different than all the different signatures, and yet it was the same everywhere. Well, this continued, and I will conclude the sort of warm up talk by saying, or the first part of this by saying, that once I started to come into the age of identity, which people think of as puberty, I guess, 12, 13, right around 13 years of age, was when I knew enough to start reading and to start talking to people about it or looking for people to talk to about it. I didn't talk to my family about it. I would go different places, and there's a story about a Hawaiian elder that I met on a family vacation. All the other kids were out playing in the pool, and I was looking for the local Hawaiian shaman, and and actually found one, which was great. At any rate, it became this conscious pursuit, and it was a dialogue between the experiences that were happening spontaneously and the experiences that I was reading about or hearing about and learning about and being invited to cultivate or try. So that's my introduction. Now, the book, if you happen to get it, or some of you have already read it, I mean, it is filled with stories. And one of the things that was exciting for me about writing this, and I don't mind saying this, I think that is a point of distinction about the book itself, is that it describes each of these 7 categories from the inside and out. So there's a lot of work being done today on the nature of spiritual, well, there's more work being done today on the nature of spiritual experience. I love the work of Andrew Newberg, who's a neurologist, and there's many others working on these sort of questions of consciousness, but they're very focused on the mechanisms, right? What's going on in the brain, or is it plant medicine, or is it yoga, or is it the breath? I'm interested in why people keep going back to it. It's nice if the brain can produce an experience, but the brain is always producing an experience. Uh, it's nice if something changes our physiology, but everything changes our physiology. Why do people return to these experiences again and again? Why do they long for them? Why are they life changing? So, with that, let's talk about what these 7 experiences are. And then, with each one, as I say, clarify what it is, when it tends to happen or doesn't, what it teaches, and why we need it. And if you're thinking of questions, please write them down because my favorite part of what we're doing is going to be talking to you and Gloria. So please don't let the rambling distract you. So the first of the seven categories, and actually I often call them seven sets, SET, spiritual experience type. It's just sort of a short acronym, and particularly if I'm talking to a doctor or a psychologist, they just sound a little smarter because they like those sorts of things. Um, so the first set I call the set of truth and beauty. So the experience of truth and beauty is the most common of all seven experiences. And in some ways, you could think of the progression in the list as a kind of inverted pyramid. So at the bottom or the top, depending how you want to start counting, if it's at the top, the first type of experience we're going to talk about, the most people have, or so it seems from research and psychology. And then we come to the second experience, and it seems a lot of people have it, but less. And then the third, and the fourth, the fifth, and then we come down to the final three, and they're much less common. Um, and yet, the most unusual and profound, I think, is no more important than the most common. And it's because they're really connected. In some ways, I don't think of this as a pyramid. I think of it as almost like a circle. So, what is an experience of truth and beauty? An experience of truth and beauty is a moment in an ordinary setting, in an ordinary day, that suddenly becomes extraordinary. So, it's your breath taken away. It's an aha moment. It's an ah moment, a moment of wonder, a moment of awe. Now, I actually had one experience like this morning. It's interesting. I had a very, very busy day. I was also very excited about this, taking me into the evening. And one thing I try to do when I have a very, very busy day and too many things to do is to block some time to do nothing, which sounds absurd, right? Because my impulse is the busier I am, the faster I have to get to it, the more I have to do. But what spiritual experience has taught me is that spaciousness and presence optimize performance. So if I rush into the day like a crazy person, all hyped up on caffeine and not organized, well, that's kind of what my whole day looks like. So I didn't have a lot of time, and I'm very fortunate to live near the ocean. It's just a 4-minute drive from my house. I live in Vancouver Island in Canada, Northwest. So I threw this cheap little Costco kayak on the roof of the car, zipped down to the ocean, threw it in the water, and I said to myself, I'm going to take 15 minutes. I'm just going to have a little water meditation. I'm going to try to do some breathing, take in the light, take in the movement, and let myself be more expansive than the narrow focused day that I have ahead of me. And I had a lovely time. Sure, it was a spiritual experience, broadly speaking, but, you know, just a really lovely moment. It wasn't anything that I would talk about in a class. And then, just as I was turning and heading back to go to the landing, I pulled my phone out of a whatever little dry bag. And I sent a message to my wife, something, heading back, and do you need anything? Because I'm going to be hitting the ground running. And just as I put the phone down and put it back in the little bag, a golden eagle, looked like a golden eagle. I actually have to look it up because it could have been an immature bald eagle. Huge, huge eagle came swooping, not too close, but quite close, and right in front of me. And just like that, I lost my breath. And I was completely captivated. Even though I was already in a beautiful place, even though I was already relaxed, there was just this, excuse me, this moment that took my breath away. And more than that, it was this kind of like confirmation of something or a calling, even, right? So it wasn't just a sense of wonder, but it was this sense that here I distracted myself for a moment with the phone. And I don't know, I took it as a kind of confirmation that I must keep returning, returning to nature and spirit for me. But you know, if I didn't get out there, and if I wasn't in a process of trying to be present, I, I would have been in my office. I probably wouldn't have seen an eagle at all. So these moments can happen when we're gardening. They can happen when we're walking through a park. They can even happen in a grocery store. We have a moment where, for some reason, we've slowed down, we're completely present, and we're awestruck just for a moment at the incredible variety of foods that we have. We just for a moment realize that our ancestors might have gone a whole lifetime without seeing the variety of food that we will sometimes see in 10 minutes in a grocery store. The point is, a moment of truth and beauty is like a glimpse of the ultimate nature of reality, which tells us that life is beautiful, that we are connected, that there is more to life than what we think and what we have and what we've been told, and it feels true. It feels truthful. It feels like that moment is the way things really are. And then we go back to whatever's going on. So, in terms of when these sorts of things happen, I would say those kinds of experiences happen most when we are present. And no, we typically don't cultivate moments of truth and beauty. Those are typically surprises. Excuse me. But they do tend to happen when we've slowed down. We're more in the moment. And there's a lot of wonderful books about presence and awe and wonder. And I'd say all of that is available to us when we just experience the moment fully. The barrier, quite obviously, is distraction, busyness, and not just the cliche of being on a phone or being distracted by a phone or wondering if you're getting a message or you need to check something. We can do that without a phone. We can just be in our own mind, repeating stories, analyzing what's going on, judging people around us, attached to outcomes, trying to control. And these are the kinds of things that block us: control, judgment, attachment, and the kind of thinking that ruminates around what keeps us safe, what we like best, what we want most. What it teaches, of course, is that no matter what we go through, no matter how stuck we feel, there's always something more, something bigger. That we are a part of something more and something bigger. And we don't have to wait for a sacred place or a sacred teacher or a sacred practice. It's available to us all. The second practice, or the second set is called ordinary magic. And when I finish, I have a slide. I think I'm not going to go to the slide just yet, I don't think. Um, but ordinary magic is an experience in an ordinary setting that is in itself extraordinary. So that would be like an unexplained synchronicity. That would be like a miracle, right? Something, someone who heals that's not supposed to heal. A coincidence of, this is not my best example, but some people on this call have heard me give some other examples recently, so I'm going to try to keep it fresh. But I I had a distinct moment of remembering someone, as we often do, who I haven't thought of in a long time. I was traveling. I was at an airport. The airport was not where I live, and it was not where I knew that person from. But I thought to myself, just one brief moment, like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe how long it's been since I've seen Jamie. And I was sad for a moment, like I've got to contact him. And I swear to God on my life, I was walking to my gate and you wouldn't believe who I saw, like getting a pretzel or I don't know, at some food stand, and it was him. I and we all have those moments, a synchronicity, a week where you see the number 1111, every single time it's on your clock, twice a day, every day. Um, we have these unexplainable experiences in ordinary settings, and they're important because in the moment they happen, almost like a magic trick, the mind grows quiet. the heart opens and we're filled with curiosity, with wonder, and we realize that there's so much more that the world is capable of than we normally consider. Possibility shows up, innovation shows up, and a profound sense that we are never isolated. So, ordinary magic is when something unexplainable happens in an ordinary setting. Now, these experiences are, and sorry, when do these things happen? Well, I don't know that these are the kinds of things that you can necessarily say they have a particular setting. I will say that the more you pay attention to synchronicity and the more you are inquisitive about the unexplainable or you look to be surprised in your everyday life, the more you're going to have those experiences. The barriers, of course, are the mind of certainty that looks for no surprise, that explains away anything surprising or synchronistic. And so we have to be careful that our impulse to control, to be right, to be certain, doesn't somehow diminish our capacity to see this magic around us. Now, what does it teach? Well, I believe that it, amongst many things and all the things I talked about before, these experiences of ordinary magic teach us that extraordinary things are possible and we can participate in them. That for lack of a better word, miracles do happen. And that is important because it gives us hope. And I said before, it inspires us to be creative. It inspires us to be curious. And it helps as an antidote to the narrowing of life. And my goodness, and when we look at the troubles in the world today, this expansive thinking would be critical, I'd say, for us all. So, in terms of the next, the next category, we have number three, the third set, which is the spirit world. Now, the spirit world is a topic that is often treated by special communities. And in the popular media, it's what people call the paranormal, although I don't really ascribe to that narrow a definition of the spirit world. So for me, the spirit world is any experience of an uninhabited or non-embodied being, and that could be a loved one that's passed over, excuse me, that could be a guide, an animal spirit, an angel, an ancestor. For me, that would even include deities, Krishna, Buddha, and even a visitation from Jesus. What the category has in common is not, there's certainly a spectrum, but it's all about interacting with a being that is beyond this world. Excuse me. So, why is this important? Well, it's important because it shapes our attitude about death. It shapes our attitude about where the world begins and ends. It shapes our attitude about so many things that we take for granted on a daily basis. And one of the things I try to help people realize is that we have answered life's biggest questions, all of us. Who am I? What matters? Where did I come from? Where am I going? We all live with implicit answers to those questions. But the problem occurs for us when we don't take those questions to heart, when we don't contemplate and reflect on those questions. In other words, many of us simply live by the conditioned answers to those questions. And when we experience the spirit world or beings from beyond, it's a way, for me, it's a way to be broken from convention, from conditioning, and to open our mind to answer these questions in a deeper way, to know, most significantly, that we are souls. We are souls on a human journey, souls in a human body. Now, examples of this can be many, many things. My most favorite example that I share most often is the story of my dad, who I mentioned earlier as being very agnostic, very cynical about spirituality. And yet, when he was in his last months of life, I think it was 2 months before he died, he had a vivid daytime waking vision of his father coming to visit him and ultimately comforting him, which was profound for us as a family because, first of all, we didn't think our dad would ever see something like that, much less tell us about it. And more than that, my dad was from a generation that didn't talk a lot about feelings, and he didn't have a lot of tools or resources to process his fear of death. And yet it was obvious to us that he was afraid, and not after that experience. So these encounters with our loved ones from beyond can be profoundly healing in themselves and also instructive and inspiring in terms of the nature of being human and what does it need to be human. Now, when do these sorts of things happen? Well, again, some of these things are easier to look for and some harder. Some we can cultivate and some not so much. I would say that guided imagery experiences, regression experiences, hypnotherapy experiences often can connect us to these other realms and beings. I do believe that ceremony and ritual can connect us to these other realms and beings. And so can meditation. However, many types of meditation are about quieting the mind and trying not to see or feel anything. So maybe that's not always it. I think the final thing that helps is simply looking for it and affirming that this is possible. Because if you've closed your mind to it, when the eagle swoops down, you just think it's pretty cool that an eagle swooped down. When your mind and heart are open to it and the eagle swoops down, it may be a communication from a world beyond. And that's a far more interesting world to live in. Um, and why do we need it? Well, it's interesting to me. This question actually pokes at something that is a very big topic. We could talk about it later if people want me to go further into it. But I actually believe that the experience of the spirit world is an intrinsic link to an older consciousness that is needed in order to heal our future. So, big idea in a short summary. The way I see the unfolding of life is that the first phase or stage was mystery itself. Whatever preceded everything that is, whatever gave birth to that big bang or the first moment, even if you believe, I don't know, that the earth was magically created by a divine being, there's still the moment before all that. So that's the first phase. To me, that's the origin era. And that mystery is still with us. It's important. If we think that we know everything, we're in trouble. And then came the age of nature. That was before human technology and design. I call it the age of nature because there was nothing happening but nature. Stars, planets forming, dinosaurs, and the whole deal. It's just life unfolding. No one writing books about it, no one analyzing it, no one ascribing meaning to it. But then human culture arises. Human culture develops, and we have cave paintings, and we have artifacts, and what we know from the oldest stories of humans to human culture just 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, is that we lived once in an animated world. In fact, if you remember anthropology in college or even some basic high school courses would talk about animism and this kind of idea that once upon a time our foolish ancestors who were superstitious and uneducated, they believed everything had a soul. They believed everything could be talked to. Now we find that that's frankly true. And science is bearing that up. Trees talk to each other, animals talk to each other. We even discovered that animals and trees talk to each other. It's extraordinary. And yet, in that realm, that age, the world was flat. And I don't mean flat like we thought it was flat. I mean We were relationally oriented. We lived in small communities. It was the age of what we might call the feminine. Not necessarily women, but there were more matriarchs. There was more a focus on process than goal. Life was simply closer to nature. And spirits, which is where I was going with all this, spirits were critical to that world and worldview. Even the mega societies that came up in that older era, whether it's the Mesopotamians or Egyptians, these societies were filled with an interactive relationship with gods and goddesses and spirits. If we're going to live in harmony with each other and our planet, there is so much of that consciousness that must return and be integrated into our use of technology and wealth and power. So, in some ways, this paranormal encounter, these spirit experiences, I think are so much more than that. They are ways of being united with the wholeness of human consciousness, which is an extraordinary thing to say. Well, let's keep going. The last few kind of compress a little bit, they get a bit short. Um, the next one is experience of the cosmic self. At least I think that's the order that I've got them in. I talk about it so much I should know. Yes, so the next one is the cosmic self. The cosmic self experience is one in which we retain awareness, but we feel that we've left our body. This could happen in a dream, an out of body experience. Some people talk about astral travel. The setting for this is more often than not either something, if it's ordinary, would be sleep or meditation, and much less ordinary would be near-death experiences, sudden, emotional crisis, extreme experiences of threat or abuse. It is not unusual for lack of a better word, for the soul consciousness to leave the body and observe what's happening from outside and then come back when it's safe. A lot of survivors of abuse actually have had this experience and don't feel comfortable talking about it until they hear someone say, "Oh yeah, that's normal." And then you'd be surprised how many people would say, "Oh my gosh, and I've heard this, when I was 6 years old, we'd hide under the bed and I felt like I could leave my body because dad was coming home drunk again. And then I was afraid for my brother and sister." Terrible, painful stories. And yet that awareness, that human capacity would go beyond the body to sense and see what was happening without even physically being there. And of course, many of us have heard stories of people who've died in operating rooms and were above the table and observed what happened and came back in. So, what's significant about the experience of the cosmic self is that, unlike the spirit experiences where we're seeing a being outside ourselves, in the cosmic self, we become that being. We are the being of consciousness. We may have a form similar to our own, just like in a dream of flying, but, but, in the but we are out of the body and we are free. We are free of the limits of ordinary life. And the value of this is that it teaches an expansive mind. It teaches creative possibilities, and it begins to connect us more both to the world of spirit and to the next category, which is divine energy. So the experiences of divine, and pardon me, if you want to know how to cultivate that, people study lucid dreaming, again, guided imagery, hypnosis, regression, meditation, anywhere in which you are richly using the imaginative uh, mind, the creative mind. Imagination for me is really just one step away from the intuitive access to the spirit world. They're just side by side. So much of the creative imaginative world intuitively draws spiritual wisdom and meaning in, but it can move the other way as well. Experiences divine energy. This is, we are a number 5, I think. So experiences of divine energy are experiences on a spectrum that range from what I described earlier, just a sense of subtle energy, Like it feels different to be around this person than that person, or to wear this color versus that color, or be in this building versus that building. And why we pick this car and that car, sometimes all we can say is, I don't know, it was just the energy, it just felt right. But on the other extreme, we have profound transcendent experiences where we leave the body, we leave ordinary awareness, and we enter the energy realm. Now, this is often associated with psychedelics and plant medicines. It is not unusual, and we've all seen the kind of kaleidoscopic art and visual imagery that comes out of that sort of psychedelic, I don't know, movement. And what's being depicted, though, is typically something that refers to the visions that people have in these experiences. And you can also study the cultural um, art from other, from shamanic traditions and so on. And in particular, if you look at the ayahuasca traditions in South America, you'll see that the art is depicting divine energy. But when you enter into itself, you participate in it. The body dissolves. There's no more cosmic self. You are energy in energy. You can see energy, feel energy, and typically you're not moving, but your mind is traveling as if a particle of energy within energy. You may see, you may have emotion, there's color. Um, and remarkably, in many experiences like this, there is a sense of being healed or healing. So these are, well, this is sort of the divine energy summary. Now, how do you make that happen? That's tough. We're now getting into stronger practices, more physiologically based practices. So holotropic breath work would be an example. If you couldn't find a safe and guided approach to plant spirit medicine, there's that. Again, I'm going to say it again, meditation and guided imagery certainly can get you there, or you might simply take up the study of some type of energy medicine, some energy practice. And I do believe that that is necessary for our evolution and our world because, well, frankly, for me, because it is the truth of things, because the world is comprised of subtle energy, and to understand subtle energy is to understand the world. Interestingly, spirituality and science have been doing a dance together since time immemorial. And it wasn't that long ago, maybe 20 years ago, that many of us, you watching this included, we were excited about the way quantum physics was revealing that, so much of spirituality was justified in the scientific world. But now it continues. And now, as the scientific community moves beyond the quantum realm, which is happening through high energy physics, they are looking at what occurs below what is known as the Planck scale. In other words, we keep looking at smaller and smaller and smaller levels of reality, and they have quite literally recently broken through theoretical physics and mathematics to what they believe is quite literally the underpinnings of all reality. This is big stuff. You can Google it. You're not going to find spirituality talking about it. High energy physics. It's in academic circles right now. And what they're revealing is that not only is our universe more uh, shifting energy than it is matter, but below that energy is actually a dimension that is beyond time and space and comprises a majority of that which we might call reality itself. And this moves us into the last two categories, which are um, formless spirit, category 6, and pure consciousness. Now, both of these experiences, which I'm going to finish with, and then we can get into our questions and applications, and I hope we can have lots to talk about. Both of these experiences are at least academically what would be considered the classic mystical experience. Now, some people, and it's fine, some people consider any spiritual experience a mystical experience. Some people don't even know what the word means, so they just use word mystical for anything that's weird, like, ooh, Sarah had a mystical experience, by which they mean Sarah's being weird. Um, but that's not what we mean by mystical experiences at all. A mystical experience, in my academic training, was very specifically experience in which you directly encounter the ultimate nature of reality. And so you see beyond the ordinary, you see beyond the beings, you see even beyond the energy, or you feel. It's a felt sense. So an experience is a formless spirit, which happened by grace. Again, meditation, prayer, any rigorous spiritual practice might catapult you into that. But in experiences of formless spirit, typically what we encounter is the sense that there is a presence, consciousness, divine presence, whatever you might want to call that, that is within but beyond everything. So it may be in all life, the trees, the coffee mug, the chair, but it's more than that. There is a formless dimension that holds all things, and we have the capacity to directly perceive that. And it feels like love, and we interpret it as consciousness, and sensorily, it's like energy. But what's profound about this is that it is humbling, it is connecting, it is pacifying in the sense that it brings peace to the heart because all suffering becomes small in the vastness of formless spirit, the feeling that love and wisdom is ever present. This is definitely one of the less common of all the experiences, although we can have it. Any of us can have it. Some of you have had it. What's distinct, though, before we finish with pure consciousness, is that in the experience of formless spirit, there is still a subject and an object. I, whether it be in meditation or in some other form, I sense, feel, or perceive that there is a world beyond this world, more than that, that there is a force within and around all things, and that that is the truth. And from that place, I can absorb it, I can feel it. It comes through me in human ways like love, like insight, like meaning. I can understand things in that moment of formless spirit. But when we move into the experience of pure consciousness, things change. The experience of pure consciousness is arguably the most radical human experience, that it is the most extreme of the spiritual states, and it is often debated by scholars whether we can even claim that it's true. Because what happens in the pure consciousness experience is even you yourself, the observer, completely dissolve into the experience. There is no, oh wow, in this. There is no, what I'm looking at in this. There is no learning, no feeling, no nothing, because quite literally, this is the, for lack of a better word, ultimate experience of oneness in which there are no two things in that moment. We are not asleep and we are not awake in an ordinary way or even in an extraordinary way. And yet, the hallmark of the pure consciousness experience is that we sense it just as we enter and we sense it just as we exit. And as we exit, we leave as if we've just stepped out of the swimming pool. Maybe we were blindfolded. Maybe we didn't know we were in a swimming pool, but we are dripping wet with the experience. And so typically the experience of pure consciousness unfolds for days, weeks, months, sometimes even years for those that have the experience. And I will say there was one moment in particular that stands above all else in my life as that experience. And I do write about it in the book. And I will tell you, it happened to me 31 years ago, which says something about my age. Um, and if I close my eyes, I can still feel the residue, the return, the potency. And I know even in this moment that after 31 years of living with it, owning it, feeling it, making sense of it, drawing from it, studying all this stuff, I'm still scratching the surface of whatever that vastness truly is. This is the realm of the ineffable, the unexplainable, the wordless. And this is also what the non-dualists are consumed by. Non-dual, no two things. Maybe I will close then by saying what's profound about the last two or three and why they matter most, or so much, pardon me, is that identity shifts. And we begin to not only see that we are interconnected, but we quite literally see ourselves in all things and all things in ourselves. God and I are one. I am God, God is me. Now, you can also understand why so many great masters got into trouble, right? Because they disappeared for a weekend and who knows what that crazy guy was doing in the cave, and they came back and said, I'm God, and then they threw him in jail. Or she said, I'm God, and they, sent her off to um, a place to be kept away from people. That happened a lot. And yet, the true gift of that is that when we persist in our spiritual experiences, and particularly when we touch these deeper places, we have an inextinguishable sense that we are all things and all things are within us. And as that identity expands, that self-preservation mechanism now becomes the drive to serve, to love all things, to care for all things, to create equity between genders and races and societies, to share wealth, to manage technology, to create a world that is loving and kind and just. And I will stop there so that we can dive into our conversations. And Gloria, I wonder if you're ready to go.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. That was a wonderful encapsulation, if that's a word, of the seven stages. And one of the things that struck me in your book was how articulate, how you can talk about these things, write about these things that are, even as you say, ineffable, but just explaining so much that is so difficult to explain. And so that people can get an idea of what these states are composed of. And it's it's really truly a gift that I think you have and that the world needs to understand these things. Yeah.
Thank you. That's remarkably generous. Thank you.
um, One of the things that struck me, one of the, in I wrote this quote where you say it's okay to be attracted to or fascinated by certain types of spiritual experience, but if your goal is true joy, peace, and balance in life, then even amazing and magical states of consciousness can be distractions from a deeper spiritual awakening. And I think that's very true. Although I think when you state that, you're not you're not trying to discourage people from having them, but it's just I remember my spiritual teacher up there on the wall. His name was Rudy. He talked about how when we meditate, we may have a lot of different phenomena, but if we get stuck on that, if we get attached to anything that we're seeing, or that it will stay there instead of going further, right?
Yeah.
And also the difference between, it made me think of, when the ego gets involved, that's something you also point out in your book, that and a lot of spiritual teachers have fallen prey to that kind of occupational hazard, you know.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and so it's the difference between, as Ken Wilber says, a state and a stage, right? So we have all these experiences, and we can have an experience of enlightenment, um, and then we think, oh, I'm enlightened now. But, you know, just having the experience is doesn't mean that we're at that stage. The
Right.
stage is an abiding consciousness
Yeah.
of that, you know, that level. Um, and but even though just a momentary glimpse, a momentary experience can change our lives. And in that sense, it becomes an abiding presence in our life. But it's not the same as, you know, being enlightened, right? Just an
Yes.
enlightened being. So I thought that was interesting. You want to say something more
Yeah,
about?
I'm just making notes as you talk. You've just brought up so many important things. So, so the first thing is that what I love about your example about teachers that kind of abuse these experiences, for
Mhm.
example, they're good at accessing energy, and then they become the energy master, and everyone has to go to them, or
Mhm.
they're good at communicating with spirits, and then they become, and I've actually been around a lot of psychics and mediums, and they're all over the map. I mean, some are sweet and wonderful, and some are just like
Mhm.
anybody else, right? Full of their own
Mhm.
challenges. So the thing that's exciting to me about that is it actually shows us how natural spiritual gifts are. Like just because you have a spiritual gift doesn't turn you into a benevolent, compassionate, fully awakened being. It's just another dimension of being human, actually. I mean, that's really what I hope people can reclaim from the book is not to say, oh, wow, Jonathan's done a whole bunch of cool stuff. Hopefully that's true because it's my life and I wanted to enjoy it. But it's not about admiring someone else. It's not about being someone else. It's not about making someone else the expert. It's saying, oh, these states or the soul skills that come out of them, this is a part of the fullness of being human.
Mhm.
And just like anything that's a part of the fullness of being human, music, sports, art, math, politics, we can corrupt it, we can abuse it, we can use it selfishly. So yes, the ego work continues. Speaking of Ken Wilber, he had a wonderful insight, and I love some of his things and other things are not for me, but he contributed so much. One of his other profound insights was to point the difference out between people on the spiritual journey that are interested in waking up versus growing up.
Mhm.
And so what he observed is that in the spiritual world today, there's a large group of people that are fixated on enlightenment and another group of people that are fixated on wholeness. And they're not actually the same thing. One group is really all about healing and it's more psychologically bent, and the other one is more focused on peak experiences. But ultimately, for me, it's about bringing the two together. So, as you said, can we cultivate these experiences but not be attached to them? Or if we use them to help others or in our lives, um, we can enrich those skills, but again, continue to grow and grow. Another thing I thought I would mention, I had three quick notes to touch on. I really like the way you talked about just because you have an experience. And it sounds like a little cynical, but it's so important because the journey is so big, right? It's almost like, so what I was going to say is just because you have the experience doesn't mean you're enlightened. It's sort of like someone who goes away on a vacation. You kind of meet people like this once in a while. Uh, they get a discount flight, they go to Mexico, they spend the weekend there, or maybe they get a week there, and they come back, you know, this person's from Milwaukee, pardon my expression, but they're white as snow, never been to Mexico before. Oh, but now they're an expert on Mexico. Oh, I'll tell you what it's like down there, and here's what the people are like. And here, it's like, come on, man, like a resort and like a 1 mile stretch of beach with a little village. You don't know Mexico. So, so yes, people can become enchanted and I think that's the word I like to use, people become enchanted by some of these experiences. It's not the same as enlightened. Enchanted means they're in awe of it, they're proud of it, they're savoring it, they're exploring it, and that's great. But to your point, let's just be careful about the ego. And just because we access a non ordinary realm, you see spirits, you feel energy, she astral travels at night. It doesn't add up to a transformation of character. And and the final thing I wanted to say is that while we find that there are people in all cultures throughout time who have pursued that transformation of character to become holy ones or wise people, people who heal by presence and not by tool, it is also fair to say that our cultures have oriented around these seven states differently, not universally, but differently. So, for example, this might seem like a funny comparison, but the Christian tradition, which is oriented in high spirit world metaphysics, a divine being, and indigenous traditions are both preoccupied with the spirit world. Now, the Christian tradition also brings in formless spirit through the Holy Ghost or Holy Spirit, however you see that, whereas the indigenous tradition would probably access more of the divine energy realm. And you see a great giftedness in their ability to create extraordinary experiences, ordinary magic. The Eastern traditions, generalizing Buddhism, Taoism, even much of Hinduism, very focused on the high experiences of formless spirit and pure consciousness. And there are some Hindu movements, as an example, as you said, that would even talk about the siddhis, right? The spiritual gifts that awaken as we have these different experiences. And some communities within Hinduism see those as dangerous. Don't pursue them. Don't talk about them. Don't feed them. So I'm only trying to say that in different times and places around the world, all seven states have remained accessible, but we've placed different emphasis on them and we have valued them for different reasons.
Yeah. And to your point about um, uh, how to use the gifts that were given and the experiences that we have, I think that one of the problems was that I observed was that in the 60s and 70s, when we were importing a lot of Eastern traditions and disciplines and things, we also left out a lot. We imported them selectively, and we didn't so much import the the Buddhist idea of uh, service to all sentient beings. So our meditations became more of an isolated thing, and don't bring me down, don't bother me, don't distract me. I'm meditating, I'm trying to get enlightened.
Right.
It
Don't bring me
became
down.
right, exactly. And and that is a very, I think, important and serious omission.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
this is a very, very, I love your observations, Gloria. This is a big topic. To me, it's a
Mhm.
very important topic for modern seekers because respectfully, what happens, well, let me give you an analogy. My PhD work was on it was exploring the idea of Western academics studying indigenous spiritual and healing traditions. And the contention that has existed with anthropology for some decades that comes out of indigenous communities is that most of anthropology, and I say this with a lot of respect and gratitude because there's lots of great things that come out of anthropology, but most of anthropology has reflected anthropologists. And so the analysis of the cultures they go to experience is a Western analysis. And so things are called symbolic, or things are described in kinship patterns, or things are described psychologically or sociologically. That's not how they experience it. So
Mm.
it's not to say we don't learn anything from the anthropological analysis. Sure, we do. But we have to be careful and be clear what we're learning. We're learning about an academic analysis of another. We aren't actually getting to know the other, right? It's a little bit like if that I joked about the fellow who goes to Mexico, he's now the expert, and you go to his house for dinner, and so he cooks you fajitas and you get to wear the big sombrero. Come on. That's not Mexican culture. That's a tourist gimmick. Is it true that you can eat fajitas and find have big hats? Yeah, okay, that's true. But do you see what I'm saying? We have to be careful that we don't reduce, and I use that kind of dramatic example for a reason. We don't reduce the vastness of these religious traditions and cultures and histories to a book or a workshop or even a single author. Now, I do want to add something to that. To be clear, I don't think those things have no are valueless. I do think that the workshops matter. I do think being exposed to other traditions matter. And if all you get is a book that's been influenced by Hinduism or Buddhism or Judaism, well, great. It's better than nothing. But I think there's two mistakes that you brought up that I think are critical. One is representation. So it's one thing to say, this book was inspired by ancient Judaism, or this book was inspired by shamanic traditions. This book is inspired by Hindu monastics. Great. Love that. Inspired by, fair enough. When you watch a movie and it says inspired by, you know what you're getting. Yeah, it's a little bit like what happened, but it's kind of our own version. Beautiful. I would love the world to share more things that they have been inspired by. But that doesn't always sell books. So instead, we say, I lived with the monks. I was a monk. I became a shaman. We need to somehow exaggerate our identity so we can take ownership of the knowledge. But if we haven't earned it, then I don't believe we've learned it. And I will tell you, I have as a at least on the surface as a Caucasian. I don't really identify as Caucasian. I identify as Semitic, but at any rate, is basically a white guy who's been allowed into indigenous communities and one community which I consider my home community for over 30 years, and I've participated in countless ceremonies, and I've been involved in the intimate most encounters and studied under a person who I consider my own father and did degrees of I still consider myself scarcely a beginner in that knowledge because I know what it means to be around those people born into it, speaking the language, living it their whole life. And for people listening, you might wonder why belabor this? Like we get the point, okay, don't say you're something you're not. But I think what you highlighted for me is, or for us, we still have to keep our ears open to the teachers and the teachings, the philosophies and the practices that don't get posted on Instagram, that don't get talked about in popular books because because their knowledge takes too long to acquire.
Mhm.
I think we're under the illusion that we are now in an age where with artificial intelligence and the internet that all knowledge is available to everyone. But actually, that's far from the truth. The most profound knowledge will never exist on the internet. It will never
All
exist.
left brain knowledge
Right,
is available on the internet,
right, right.
not so much.
But anything ineffable, anything
Mhm.
intuitive, anything intimate will always remain in the realm of experience. And so I'll just close this by saying, let us encourage people to remember the fullness of our world, the fullness of our traditions, and let us, those listening and sharing here, be among the first when a new book comes out and it's, you know, the person who said they were a monk or the person who said they were a priest or the person to ask questions, not disrespectfully, but to want to know more where it comes from out of a loving respect for the tradition that is real and exists beyond our view.
Mhm. Yeah, you mentioned about Christianity and honoring the spirit world. I'd like to qualify that a little bit, having been raised Catholic, that although they honor the spirit world in terms of, when I was growing up and going to Catholic school, we learned all about the saints and, how their lives and their experiences and their mystical experiences and all of that. But the message we got was they were different,
Right.
right? Because they were
Absolutely.
saints. So they
Yeah.
could have these experiences. We could not. We were sinners,
Yes.
right? And I remember talking, well, listening to Matthew Fox, who was a priest, a Catholic
Yeah.
priest for a while. um, and he said in 7 years of seminary training, they never had one class on mystical experience or mysticism. So it's not encouraged,
Right.
and you bring
Right.
this out in your book also,
Yes.
that 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 mostly um, Western religions tend to be threatened by deep, profound spiritual experiences in its congregation. That
Yes.
because it's a matter of control.
So if I can just to add a couple of things to that, I think that's very important that you shared that. The first is, since we're qualifying Christianity, for anyone listening, because let's face it, Christianity is near and dear to a lot of people, and it's offensive and abrasive. It's an intense tradition that's wrapped itself around the world. It's important to acknowledge, very much in light of what I just shared a moment ago, there are over 2,000 Christian denominations and sects. Over 2,000.
Mm.
So any of us, me in particular, when I say, and Christianity does this, you're right. It's important to qualify because in some Christian traditions, there is no talk of angels. In other Christian traditions, you'd think the angels were more important than Jesus, right? And it can be in terms of which community and what part of the world. So there's great diversity. The other thing I want to mention, though, comes back to that comment I made about the four ages of humanity, or I guess I should say, four ages of existence: the mystery, the age, the origin age of mystery, the natural age, the feminine, or well, let's just call it the feminine era. In the masculine era, the last one, which I didn't get into much, this is what Thierry de Chardin and scholars like Ewart Cousins called the axial age.
Mm.
And what they talked about and observed was that around a small, relatively small window of time, about 500 years preceding the appearance of Christ, there was a proliferation of teachers that had a similar axial teaching. Now, the word axial was referring to the idea of an axis, that there's this world and then there's the spirit world up, and we can go up through transcendence to get there. See, the indigenous worlds were more horizontal, right? I'm in relationship to my neighbors and to my clan and to the forest and the river and the bears and all the creatures around me. It was horizontal. The axial age became stratified. Of course, the gifts are the practices, the teachings, the philosophies that really focused on formless spirit, pure consciousness, high mysticism, and so on. But the gifts were also the curse because the stratification of spirituality was also matched by the stratification of society and politics and what we've seen over the last 2,500 years. And this is not, I mean, gosh, this is not a belief. This is something you can undebatably observe in the world. You saw power and control narrow and narrow and narrow, and fewer people have more and more and more. And we look back and we often say things like, oh, yeah, wasn't Rome terrible like that? Wasn't the Chinese Empire terrible like that? Wasn't the, right, the Greek, wasn't the Greek Empire like that? We live in an era where I think, I can't remember the statistic, but I think it's the 10 wealthiest people in the world collectively have more than all 8 billion other people put together.
Yeah.
Like a handful. This is the height of stratification. And of course, it comes through, pardon me for taking a moment with this, but it comes through a kind of dehumanization. We lose touch with each other. We lose touch with with the feminine. We lose touch with the whole brain. And all of a sudden, if we can do it, we do it. And if we can make more money, we do it. And we've lost the heart and the intuition. Not all of us, obviously, but the global culture has moved to this place where, remember, we had like, what was it, a year or two ago, like 3 billionaires went up into space in different rockets they built. It's like the most absurd thing that's ever happened, and it came and went like a news story. Like no one paid much attention.
Mhm.
But what we failed to realize by those events was that these people put more talent, time, and money into a joyride into space than they did into solving the world energy crisis or the world food crisis or the world water crisis. And we know, and everyone listening knows, if they think, if you put that much attention and energy into any one of those problems, we'd solve it easily. But greed
Mhm.
and the stratification of power, which is the hallmark of the masculine era out of control, doesn't allow it. So, spiritual experience. Spiritual experience can break through any conditioning, can break through any culture, and will restore the missing elements, the missing piece, and more will take us into a new era of consciousness that we've never even imagined.
I think we have to differentiate between, what Riane Eisler calls the dominator um, hierarchy and the participatory.
Yes.
Um, uh, it's also, Ken Wilber talks about the dominator hierarchy versus the growth hierarchy. Okay. The
Mm-hmm.
growth
Yes.
hierarchy, when you talk about stratification, you're talking about worldly power,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
That kind of growth or that kind of hierarchy. But spiritual experience is also a vertical,
Yeah. Right.
right?
Even the book
And
is organized that way.
yeah, and I think, vertical growth and horizontal growth are equally important
Yes.
because the horizontal is the relationship. That's where we serve. That's where we relate and learn from each other, right? And the vertical, of course, is our spiritual growth and evolution. So yeah, so I just wanted to bring that in, that the vertical is it depends on what you're talking about. If it's a yeah.
So the image that I think is the most, I'm pausing just to think if I'm going to make a bold statement, but it is true for me until it's not. But I think probably the most significant image to help us understand this that has ever existed is the yin yang that
Mm-hmm.
came out of ancient China. And just to take a quick moment for people that are listening, because most of us have seen it, we all know the black and white, and people say yin yang. The misconception is that the yin yang is two different, the world is full of opposites, and the opposites are always in tension. But that is not really what the yin yang symbol depicts, and it's not what the original teaching was. So just a minute on this, because I think it relates to what you shared, which was also so important. Originally, it was understood, first of all, it's one word. It's not yin and yang, it's yin yang. It was written as one word. And that image was not two things in relationship, it was one thing with two forces in dynamic relationship with each other, two forces that comprise one. And the notion is that it was just a way to understand the way of the universe, the way of things, just the way we have, I don't know, four laws of physics. It was saying that our world is organized and thrives naturally when there is balance. And the balance is not a stiff black and white half and half, but it's fluid. It shows, yeah, sometimes we need more structure and sometimes we need more relationship, but we always need some measure of both. And I love the way you made sure that people heard that, because people can become cynical. They hear, oh yeah, the masculine, and men are bad and power is bad and money is bad. And well, no, that's not, that's now we've gone the other extreme. There's beauty and value in all things, particularly well in balance. And if you're all relationship and no strategy or aspiration, well, you probably won't help a lot of people. And if you're all strategy and skill and aspiration, but no relationship, well, you're going to be like one of those doctors with no bedside manner that everyone's just waiting for you to leave. So I think you brought our attention to balance. That in the feminine is the masculine, and the masculine is the feminine, and in the horizontal is the vertical, and the vertical the horizontal. This balance holds our universe together when we align our lives in that way. And for someone listening, what does that look like? It means you ask yourself, am I leaning too far in this conversation, in this decision, in the way I'm spending my time? Am I too passive, too active? How do I bring balance?
Yeah, and one of the things that you bring out in your book that I love is the importance of the heart, not just the mind, right? And how in many spiritual experiences we need to leave the mind behind and really just experience through the heart. Um, Also, oh, there was something else I wanted to. Oh, yeah. Another thing that you bring out that I think is very important is is the importance of integrating the experience that we have,
Mm-hmm.
and not just integrating it within ourselves and within our lives, but also you know, applying it um, to everything we do,
Right. Yes.
informing everything we do, uh, letting that experience inform our lives, and so that we can be, a more productive
Yeah.
person in terms of helping others and
Yeah.
ourselves.
And a helpful phrasing for people who are listening to this insight of yours is, if this, then what?
Mhm,
That's the way I think of it. And I
mhm.
think too often what we do in the modern overly intellectual mind, as opposed to in the heart mind, we just want to explain things. Here's what happened, and here's what I saw, and here's what it was like. And I wonder what it means. Like, it's very, I don't know, transactional and deconstructing, as opposed to, wow, if that felt like this, then what could I carry into my life? What does that mean about my relationship? What does that, and too often, and actually this is kind of the beginning and the end of the book, I think too often people are having spiritual experiences and just don't connect it. I make a sort of funny analogy often. I think there's all kinds of people attending rock concerts and sports events, having spiritual experiences. Maybe they're a little inebriated, or maybe they're excited about the game, or maybe they've been just standing too long, or whatever it is. They're caught up in the rush of the crowd. But but out of the thousands of people there, there's always going to be some people who take a moment. Um, they walk to their car early, and in the contrast to the crashing noise, they hear spaciousness and they see the stars above at night. Or, you know, it's a 25-year-old woman at a or whatever concert with her friends, and they flop down on the grassy hill, and then they look up at the night, or they just feel the sound in their body. And we have these moments where we just feel expanded. We feel connected. We feel joy. We feel bliss. And the mistake, which I believe has been fostered by our culture, is to think, oh, I really need to go to another concert. Oh, I think I really need to go to another football game or whatever it is. No, no. In that moment, you're experiencing a deeper part of who you are. You're experiencing a deeper part of our universe. Look for it again. Not at the concert, not at the football game. Look at it again tomorrow morning when the sun comes up. Look at it tomorrow afternoon when you walk your dog. It's there. It's always there. And again, we've trivialized it in this culture. We've even shamed people for being too spiritual. So then I think people miss it and they lose the integration.
Mhm. Well, Jonathan, I have so many more things that I could talk to you about and ask you about. But I do want to give our audience a chance to ask questions also. So I'm going to open it up now. And just remember, if you want to ask your question out loud, please. Um, I see a hand up already. Just please have your
Thanks.
video on. And if you want your video off, then type your question in the chat. Okay. So we've got three hands up. Let's start with Jeff.
Yes, I have. Hello, this is Jeff and Vicki Ann King, and we both have a question for you. So I'll let Vicki Ann go first. You were talking about experiencing nature on a canoe in Canada, and I was wondering if you can commune or communicate in some way with a favored house plant.
Yes, absolutely. It's funny. I'm often reluctant to give the dramatic examples because they're harder to relate to. Like, oh, nice that you have a kayak, Jonathan, in the ocean a minute away. What about me? I'm living on the ninth floor of a condo, right? In fact, meditating with a plant or a flower is a practice in itself. To just simply gaze at the shape and the form and the way the light hits it, and use it as a meditative technique. Bring your attention back again and again to the presence, to the energy. I think this is really important what you've said. Spirit is in the world, and that means it's in the ordinary, and it's as close as we are. It's there with our pets as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you.
My question, Jonathan, and thanks for doing this with the group. My question is, you said the first of the seven practices is truth and beauty.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, what do you think is going on in the world, especially with social media? There's so much untruth and misinformation and disinformation. I know, like despots and tyrants around the world will not allow anyone to speak the truth. That's just part of certain kinds of society. But we see in this country and with social media, there's so much untruth, and no, we're getting to the place where nobody knows what truth is, or even where they acknowledge that there's any truth anymore. But what do you think about what's going on?
Yeah, what's a wonderful and sadly important question. Here's what I would say. The magnitude of the problem reflects the magnitude of the disconnect. And the problem with the human experience, as I see it, is that we are built for spiritual connection. We come from spiritual connection and we long for spiritual connection. But if we don't understand it, if we aren't shown you might say, healthy ways to achieve it, or sustainable ways, or productive ways, or fulfilling ways, then in a kind of childlike way, we, for lack of a better word, gorge ourselves on things that make us feel better. And there's no regulation and there's no sense, and it's not childlike, it's childish. And so people are craving security. So they want to be right, even if the information they surround themselves is wrong. They crave belonging. So they want to fit in, even if the way they portray themselves is not true. We sacrifice truth to satisfy this longing. And until people understand what they're really longing for, I believe they will continue to pursue these very unhealthy things. Um, I don't know if I should take any more time with this, but I think it's such a big question. My daughter, one day she'll see this and kill me, but she's 7 years old. And she, recently, over the last couple of years, she's had a little bit of her taste of candy, and we don't really do a lot of candy in our house. But what we caught her doing recently, because she has a friend who does this, was that she was collecting it anytime she could find it. She was hiding it and then gathering it in her room and then making herself sick eating candy. So my point is to say people's relationship to technology at this point is very childish. There's so little self-regulation. There's so little understanding of the impact. And much the way my daughter is not equipped to understand why what she's doing is not just not good for her, but dangerous. I think you've pointed out something that people really individually and hopefully soon collectively need to look at together. We need to mature in our relationship to technology. And that means both in terms of understanding healthy regulation. And I don't mean regulation in terms of censorship, but I just mean regulation in terms of people monitoring what's being developed and allowed. And then more than that, to look at the internal impulse that's fueling these dangerous behaviors, and let's satisfy those instead. And then we're not even going to worry about some deep fake video where we're being told a lie by someone who doesn't even exist.
Are we making progress, do you think, or are you
Well,
hoping?
actually, yeah, thank you for asking. Actually, there is a lot more work going into that than a lot of people realize. I'm not going to digress into this, but I've been interested in the topic, of digital hygiene. And Harvard has released an incredible guide for parents around this. There's a lot of psychologists turning their attention to it. There's a great book, Digital Minimalism. Yeah, there are more and more people. And then, of course, there was the film, The Social Dilemma, I think is probably an important film on Netflix. It's older now, but it's still valuable. Yeah, so it's happening slowly, slowly, but it's happening.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Allison.
Hi there, Jonathan. I can relate to this truth and beauty probably more than any of the others. And I had an experience, and I'm just going to explain it because I don't know if it led to what's happening now, the awareness of it. I like doing meditation. This is a while ago. So I'm doing a meditation. I'm just listening to music, kind of vibrational type of music. And I get this very strong vision of this forest, that particular forest, a particular path, particular set of trees and how they were. And a friend and I we go to this park a lot. It's by the river. And we're walking along, and I said, and this is fall time, I said, I felt compelled to go down this path. We've never been down it before, because it was further along. And we're walking along, and it wasn't even a few minutes. And I just stopped dead and said, okay, this is the forest that I just saw in my meditation. The way everything lined up, the leaves of the path, and this particular tree that I was drawn to, I said, this is the tree. And the person I was with, fortunately, didn't think I was just out of my mind. I said, and since then, I love being out in the forest. I love being out in nature. And when I go out now, and I love trees, I just became more fascinated with trees. And the person that I'm with, the same person, sometimes thinks this is funny, where I feel drawn to a tree, I feel drawn to touch the tree, and then I'm like, oh wow, I could really feel there's a lot of energy in this tree. And then there might be another tree where it's like, I'm not really feeling anything or very much. And so then I start thinking, okay, is this tree closer to dying? Am I perceiving this? Am I making too much
Mm.
out of it? Or is that connection possible to say by touching a tree, you can get communication or senses from that?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm completely with you. This is a very real thing, and I don't think anyone on this call thinks you're not completely sensible. So quick commentary, just looking at the time. So first of all, for the sake of just understanding the system of seven, I would call that an experience of ordinary magic, which is you had a vision and then it came true. So that's an example of ordinary place, but unexplainable phenomena. And then in that place, you had an experience of divine energy. And it may not have been like a vision, but it was a felt perception. Now, here's what I would say about why touch the tree and should you touch the tree and what does it mean? And I want to say this respectfully and supportively. One of the most significant things that I personally have learned or felt or taken from my relationship with indigenous tradition is that the West is sometimes a little too focused on meaning and not enough focused on trust and allowing. And what I mean by that is some spiritual experiences I think are innately meaningful that we don't necessarily need to explain. So maybe that's what I'm qualifying.
Mhm.
When too much meaning is explaining. If this tree feels restorative for you, be with that tree. And if this tree doesn't, don't be with that tree. And if someone says, well, that doesn't make sense, come on, just pick a tree, let's go. You've got to trust yourself. You've got to trust your intuition. And the thing that drives me a little bit mad is that people have had these feelings and made these statements for not just decades, but generations. And people were ostracized for it or chastised for it. I mean, it wasn't, even 50 years ago, if you were a kid and you acted like that in school, people would, teachers would even belittle you. And then now we have science finally showing up again saying, you need to go out in the forest and you need to pay for forest bathing. And didn't you know the trees are feeding you? And it's like, oh my Lord, like, couldn't we have just, like, we were already doing that. And then you told us to stop until you could research it. And now we get to do it again. So I'd say you are connected. You are connected. So listen to it, honor it, feel it, and feed it. If there's nothing unhealthy about it, I'd say immerse yourself in it. You have quite a beautiful gift there.
Okay. Yeah, and it's the same. The other thing was just it's a funny note. A couple of years ago, I rescued a fox. Story short, it was a sick fox. It got rehabilitated, got released back behind my house because that's where it was found. And so I kept getting all kinds of animals suddenly show up in the yard. So a couple of weeks ago, I go out every afternoon. I meditate in the morning usually. The afternoon I go out and I'm just sending out a blessing to everything. So I hadn't seen a fox for months. So I'm trying to energetically, you're safe here, you're welcome here if you want to show up. Over and over again, and nothing was happening. And then all of a sudden, there's a fox kit. This is the time of year, shows up in the backyard. I'm in the suburbs, so shows up in the backyard. But it seems as though, the foxes come, they gravitate toward my house, and then they leave. They're not necessarily going to other yards.
Hmm.
And so sometimes I feel like there's that connection or energy or some connection that I have, or welcoming energy or something that they seem to be drawn to.
Absolutely. I think your experience is amazing and beautiful. And I bet if a million people heard this, I wouldn't be surprised if, well, maybe exaggerating, but I wouldn't be surprised if close to half had some unexplainable story with nature. Not maybe quite as magical as that, but we don't understand what nature feels, animals, what they perceive. But certainly in many traditions, there's an understanding that they feel much more than we understand our hearts, our intentions. Um, and a quick story, and I see Jan's hand is up, and we're
Yes,
going to get there,
yes.
Jan, before we run out of time. I had an experience once of a hummingbird flew into a window at our house, and it was
Mm.
laying, I need to say, like, wasn't looking good on its side, and a little tongue hanging out, and looked like blood. And there was something in the moment where it was more than just, oh, I wonder if I could help it. There was an immediate heart impulse. And I put my hands over it without touching it. And I prayed and, I do some energy work. And I mean, really with all my heart focused on it. And when I opened my hands, the hummingbird was sitting up. And, I kind of did a little more. And then I thought, well, it looks well and it's breathing and it seems calm. I'm going to just, kind of protect it and leave it alone. So the hummingbird flew away. Now, without any exaggeration, there were other people around that saw it. For the next, I can't remember, 2 or 3 days, it was for sure 2 days, I'd say at least once an hour, a hummingbird came to me right in front of me and disappeared and back and gone. I mean, I say all day, throughout the day, um, over 2 days and then gone, never seen again. What is that? Coincidence? I think not. All right,
Mm.
Jan?
I'm glad you told that hummingbird story because it relates to my question. Um, I'm involved with a group of retired nurses mostly, but nurses who do therapeutic touch, where they have hands-on healing. It sounds like you did therapeutic touch on the hummingbird.
Mhm.
So I meet with this group every Friday morning at 9 o'clock on Zoom for a meditation, and there are about 75 to 80 women, some men, but mostly women, who do this every Friday.
Wow.
And we experience the unity of the group and the harmony of the group. And then we feel the energy of our hearts. And then we start sending it out. And we send it out to individual people and to groups. And this morning, when we were sending it out to some community that needed it, I thought of Haiti because there's so much. I mean, I could have thought of Gaza or Ukraine, any group, and was sending it out. And then I had the question, does this make any difference? And how many of us would have to be doing this? And when people talk about creating peace on earth, I mean, I think of the secret. And when people use their energy to create a big house on the hill, I think, why the hell don't you create peace on earth instead if you have that kind of power? So anyhow, as we're doing this every Friday, are we making any difference?
Oh my gosh, in my
Can you
opinion,
just talk about that?
well, I think you know how I feel, and I know how you feel. Of course, it's making a difference. And it makes a difference, if anyone's listening that's sort of skeptical, it makes a difference on many levels. The first level, of course, is that you have 75 people feeling love, feeling connected. And if nothing else happened but that, I think that's fabulous. I'd like to be there. But we have ample evidence that more than that is going on. There was a book by Lynn McTaggart called The Intention Experiments, a book by Larry Dossey called One Mind, and all kinds of books written on this topic. Deepak Chopra wrote one of his oldest books, The Spontaneous Fulfillment of Desire, not often talked about, super book by Deepak Chopra. And they all show scientific evidence that there are improbable results when energy healing is done. That there's quite literally no way to explain the coincidence that you know, the intuit or the intuition experiments, the Lynn McTaggart book. I just wondered if I just got that name wrong. I mean, they did
Uh,
experiments, for example, like they picked two plants
the
and they would have
intention
them in,
experiment. The
right?
intention
Intention
experiment.
experiment. Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
They would have two plants, in two separate rooms in one part of the world, and people were sending to one and not the other. I mean, there was no even way to fake it, and one would thrive and one would die, and Masaru Emoto had all kinds of material that he released, and the challenge with his stuff was that it became so popular and sensationalized that I think the scientific rigor diminished and people were sort of doubtful. But there was lots of good material that he showed, and Greg Braden is another author who shows a lot of it. And one great experiment was simply cut leaves. They had geranium leaves and two trays, and one were prayed over and one weren't. And there was no debating the evidence that the leaves prayed over stayed vibrant as if they were just cut for a dramatic extension of time versus the ones that weren't. So yes, absolutely. And in terms of the seven, types of spiritual experience, what's happening is we use ritual and belief to access a felt state that moves energy. And the way the last thing I'll just say, because the big answer is yes. The way I think about the way the universe works energetically is like a pendulum. So if you picture a pendulum string with a weight at the bottom, imagine even like on a grandfather clock, it's a stiff arm. Well, if you tap it at the bottom, right, it's actually much easier to make it move because you've got the weight. And if you try to wiggle it here and make the whole thing move, it's harder, but you can do it. So the analogy is this: at the densest realm, at the densest layer of reality, it's like the ball of the pendulum. It's visual, it's heavy. And if you want to say, like, do I have the power to throw this rock across the room? Well, yeah, I can just do this. I don't need my mind. I can hit the bottom of the pendulum. But is it possible to move this with my mind? Of course it is. But the difference is I'm now moving it at a finer level of energy. And that would require a greater focus and a greater capacity. And actually, Lynn McTaggart wrote a book called The Power of Eight. And she suggests that activating power happens around 8 people, in which improbable movements of energy begin to occur. Is it possible some people are just built differently and they can move that pendulum even in the finest degree and have the effect at the coarsest level? Absolutely. These things are happening around us, but they're so hard to explain that they're scary, they're misunderstood, and very often science isn't interested.
And Jonathan, I think if this is true, why aren't millions of us stopping the war in Gaza and Israel?
I would echo that, and I would say with you right now, anyone who hears this, if there is something unjust in this world and you would like to see its end, don't just shake your head. Use your heart and pray and meditate as if you could end it yourself. And the more people, and whether that's Gaza, the Ukraine, the pain on the inner city streets of America, hold it, pray for it. The worst possible thing that is going to happen is that you won't get what you want, but you will fill your heart with love and compassion. And I can't see anything wrong with that.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to energy and what you just suggested, I really believe that the energy is never wasted. It
Yes.
always
Never.
benefits on some level that we may not see, but it always benefits, just like the energy healing.
Yes.
They may or may not be a physical change, but the energy is never wasted. It always benefits on some level.
I believe that.
Jonathan, I just don't want to end this, but
Come to the
unfortunately,
end.
we are out of time. And I hope you'll come back sometime because there are so many more things that I'd love to chat with you about and explore with you about on these 7 dimensions of, spiritual experience that you talk about. So thank you. Thank you so much for being with us. And thank you all who attended. And we will hopefully see you again sometime.
Thank you so much. Thank you for everyone who's attending, and thank you for everyone who watches in the future. Gloria, thank you for all your work and for having me here.
Thank you.